Now that the Canadian election is over, now coming to light are some of the dirty tricks that have been used in this election. There's one very serious anti-democratic action that has been taken. Voters in Ontario, Manitoba, and BC have reported that they've received phone calls on election day telling them that their polling station had changed, and as a result, they went to the wrong polling station. Frank Valorit, a Liberal candidate in Guelph, had received numerous complaints from his constituents that they had received phone calls telling them to go to different polling places than the cards they received in the mail had told them to go. Now, he's taken these complaints and brought them to Elections Canada. Not only has Elections Canada been notified of this, they've also filed a complaint with the police, and the sources of these phone calls are currently under investigation. Elections Canada has received over 100 complaints from the Kitchener-Waterloo area, as well as several dozen from the Ottawa area about having calls telling people to go to different polling places. Unfortunately, it didn't just stop there. In British Columbia, voters were also given the same fictitious calls, claiming to be from candidates telling them to go to these different places. Elections Canada, and as well as many Canadians as well, would like to remind everyone that willfully keeping people from voting or interfering with the voting process in several different contexts, keeping people from voting or deliberately causing confusion over the issue of voting in terms of where to go and how to do it, is an offense under the law, and a person doing so can receive fines as well as jail time. However, the underhanded tactics do not stop there. In Montreal, a place that was well known was going to vote NDP, and not only that, almost never votes Conservative, either Bloc or NDP. People in Montreal were showing up to their polling stations to find out that their names had already been crossed off the list, as though they had already voted. Several people in these situations had to go and get an affidavit swearing they had not already voted in order for them to vote in the democratic election. This shows a very serious attack on our democratic rights. No comment or press release has been forthcoming from Stephen Harper or the Conservative Party of Canada. In my mind, there is no doubt that these attacks on democracy came from the Conservative Party, and more specifically, from its lackeys. The places where these happened were places that were expected not to vote Conservative, and traditionally have not voted Conservative. I think this is a very troubling shift in Canadian politics, that US-style dirty tricks that threaten democracy are now spreading here with the election of a Conservative government. I think we have to be very concerned that US-style politics is making its way into Canada. As many will remember, these are the same tactics that were deployed against African Americans during both elections in which George Bush took place. African Americans showed up to polling stations to find out that they had already been crossed off the list as having been voted, or they have been knocked off the voter registry, so they had to re-register in order to be able to vote. Not only that, African Americans also received phone calls telling them that their polling station had been changed and they went to the wrong location. Now, this has a much more significant impact in the United States, where voting is notorious for taking far, far too long. Oftentimes there are hours to wait for someone to be able to vote. So certainly this style of election fraud now taking place in Canada under a Conservative Prime Minister has myself very worried. Myself and many others are worried that this is the beginning of a new trend of US-style politics, US-style policies being forced through in Canada under a now Conservative majority government. We already have two unlawful invasions of both Afghanistan and Libya. There is great fear that these things will expand and will become more like a US military power. It's time for Canadians to actually stand up for Canada and help begin driving the Harper regime out of Ottawa.